Hey man. The cashier's voice dropped low. He was maybe 22, acne on his jaw, a name tag that said Brett. He leaned across the counter and tilted his head toward the window. Is that your wife out there? I had just set down 2 bottles of water and a bag of trail mix. We were on our way back from my son's soccer tournament, 3 hours from home. My wife had said she needed to stretch her legs, said she'd wait by the car. I looked through the glass. She was standing near the back bumper. Phone pressed to her ear. Laughing. Head tilted back the way she used to tilt it when something genuinely surprised her. And her free hand was reaching out, resting on the forearm of a man I had never seen before. He had a duffel bag over his shoulder. He wasn't a stranger to her. That much was obvious in the way she touched him. Easy. Familiar. Like muscle memory. Brett was still watching me. She was talking to him when you pulled in. I just thought you should know. I'm sorry, man. I picked up my change. I said thank you. I walked back out into the August heat and I smiled at her when she looked up. Ready? She said, already moving toward the passenger door. Ready? I said. My name is Owen Barrett. I'm 32 years old. I work in cloud infrastructure. I coach my son's soccer team on weekends, and until that moment at a gas station off I-77, I believed I was living a life I had actually built. 9 years of marriage. A house we renovated together room by room. A son named Caleb who still climbs into bed between us on Sunday mornings. I believed in all of it. I had never once thought to question it. And that, I would later understand, was the problem. She fell asleep somewhere around mile marker 140. I drove the rest of the way home in silence, watching the road, letting the math settle. The man at the gas station had a North Carolina plate on his car. We were in South Carolina. He had a duffel bag, which meant he was either coming or going somewhere. My wife had told me that morning she needed to stop by her mother's place the following Tuesday. Her mother lived in Charlotte, North Carolina. I didn't shake. I didn't feel rage. What I felt was closer to the way you feel when a doctor shows you an X-ray and you don't know exactly what you're looking at yet, but his silence is telling you more than his words. I put Caleb to bed that night. I read him 2 chapters of the book we'd been working through all summer. He was asleep before the 2nd chapter ended. I turned off his lamp and stood in his doorway for a moment longer than usual. Then I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and opened my laptop. I am not a dramatic person by nature. I don't make decisions from emotion. I grew up with a father who taught me that the most dangerous thing a man can do is react before he thinks, and the most powerful thing he can do is observe before he acts. He used to say that information is the only currency that doesn't lose value. I didn't fully understand that until that night. I started quietly. Nothing invasive. Nothing that crossed a line. I simply began paying attention to the things I had been too trusting to notice before. The gym bag she kept by the back door that she started bringing to work on Tuesdays. The way her sleep schedule shifted up later, phone face down on the nightstand, charger moved to her side of the bed. The new login on our shared tablet that she'd never mentioned. The mileage on her car that stopped making sense when I mapped her supposed routes. I said nothing. 2 weeks in, I called my friend Marcus. We'd known each other since college. He spent 6 years doing fraud investigation for a regional bank before he went independent as a forensic accountant. He now did private consulting for attorneys, mostly pre-litigation work. He owed me a favor from a bad year I'd helped him through, and he collected those debts seriously. I told him what I had. Not everything, just enough. He said, give me 72 hours. What he gave back was a file I wasn't fully prepared for. Not because the contents were surprising at this point, but because of the volume. She hadn't just been careful. She had been meticulous in the way that people are when they've been doing something for a long time and have grown comfortable in it. The text had been deleted. The apps had been scrubbed. But the metadata doesn't lie. And Marcus knew where to look. Timestamps. Location pings. Cloud backups she'd never thought to disable because she didn't know how that layer worked. His name was Derek. He worked in logistics, traveled frequently between Charlotte and Columbia. They had been seeing each other for at least 14 months, possibly longer. The earliest recoverable trace put them together at a hotel bar the same weekend I had taken Caleb to visit my parents in Tennessee. I had come home early. I remembered thinking she seemed surprised to see me. The photo that stopped me wasn't the worst one. It was a simple shot she had taken herself, the 2 of them at what looked like a rooftop bar, her head on his shoulder, a skyline behind them. I recognized as Uptown Charlotte. She was wearing the earrings I had bought her for our anniversary last spring. She looked completely at ease. That half-present smile she used to give me before our lives got crowded with mortgages and school drop-offs and the slow accumulation of everything we had built together. She had given it to him like it cost her nothing. I sat with that image longer than I should have. My name is Owen Barrett. And that was the night I understood that grief doesn't announce itself. It doesn't break down the door. It seeps in under it. And by the time you feel it, it's already been there for a while. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation without preparation is just noise. And I hadn't spent 9 years in a marriage only to let the ending get defined by one loud, ugly night that my son might hear from upstairs. Instead, I called my older sister, Dana. Dana is a paralegal who has spent 12 years working with one of the best family law firms in the state. She is also the most composed person I know in a crisis, which is the only kind of person you want in your corner when the ground shifts under you. She picked up on the first ring, listened without interrupting for 11 minutes, and then said, "Don't touch the finances. Don't tip her off. And come see me Friday." Friday, we sat down with the attorney she had already quietly briefed on the situation. I brought the file Marcus had built. The attorney reviewed it carefully, asked me 4 questions, and then told me 2 things I needed to know. First, given the structure of our mortgage and the original title, I had a legal pathway to protect the primary asset that she might not expect. Second, before anything else, I needed to know if any marital funds had been redirected. The answer to that came back within a week. She had opened a secondary savings account 14 months ago, the same month the earliest contact records appeared. She had been making small regular transfers from the joint account. Not enough to notice on a busy month. Not enough to flag anything on its own. But consistent, methodical. The total, over 14 months, was just under $11,000. I didn't know what it was for. Maybe a safety net. Maybe something she planned to use later. Maybe she didn't even fully know yet. But the pattern was clear. This hadn't been a moment of weakness. This had been a decision she had been living inside of for over a year. I closed the joint account the following Monday under a routine asset protection clause our original mortgage attorney had built into our financial agreement years ago. Back when my father had co-signed the initial loan, she had access to her own accounts. She had access to nothing else. She noticed within 3 days. She came downstairs Thursday evening while I was helping Caleb with a school project at the kitchen table. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen looking at her phone. I watched her process something. I watched her swallow it. She went back upstairs without saying a word. That was the moment I knew she understood something had changed, even if she didn't know how much I knew or how long I'd been sitting with it. The meeting I set up 2 weeks later was the kind of thing she never would have suspected from me, because I had never in 9 years given her any reason to believe I was capable of it. I am, by nature, the person who keeps the peace, who rounds off the edges, who says let's talk about this rather than let this become a fight. She had counted on that. She had used it. I booked a private dining room at a restaurant downtown. Small, neutral, professional. The kind of place where nobody raises their voice because everyone can hear everything. I sent her a message saying I wanted to take her to dinner, just the 2 of us, to talk about something I'd been thinking about. She said yes immediately. And the speed of that yes told me more than she meant it to. She got there first. She was dressed nicely. She smiled when I came in. She stopped smiling when Derek walked in behind me. I had invited him through a mutual contact. She didn't know we shared a simple, professional message suggesting a meeting to discuss an unrelated business matter. He had no idea who I was until he saw her face. I let them have that moment. The recognition, the calculation, the fear. I let it sit in the room. Then I sat down across from both of them, placed an envelope on the table, and said, "I'm Owen Barrett. And I think we all know why we're here." She said my name like a question. He started to stand. I told him, quietly, that if he left before I finished, I would simply continue the conversation without him, and what I had in the envelope would reach more people than just the ones in this room. He sat back down. I am not going to pretend that moment didn't satisfy something in me. It did. But what I felt more than satisfaction was clarity. Because sitting across from both of them, I could see plainly what I had been living next to without understanding. This wasn't love. What they had wasn't even close to it. What I was looking at was 2 people who had convinced themselves that convenience was intimacy. I pushed the envelope forward. Bank records. Contact logs. The hotel receipts. The timeline. She didn't open it. She said, "I can explain." I said, "You don't need to. I'm not here for the explanation. I already know the story. I'm here to close it." He found his voice then. He said something about this being between me and my wife. Said I had no right to involve him in whatever this was. I looked at him calmly. "You involved yourself the moment you decided a married woman with a 7-year-old son was an appropriate relationship." She was crying now. Not loudly. Just the quiet kind that happens when something finally hits the surface after a long time underground. I stood up. I told her that the paperwork had been filed that morning. That the joint account was already resolved. that the house was protected. And then I looked at Derek one last time and told him that a forensic record of his involvement in the financial transfers had been forwarded to my attorney, and that if he had any legal concerns about what that might mean for him, now would be a good time to get ahead of it. His face went pale. I left them there. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I walked out into the evening air and I called Dana and told her it was done. She said, "Come over. I'll make dinner." I went. What I didn't know yet, and what Dana had been quietly building toward for the past week, was that Derek had a record I hadn't found. Not criminal, civil, a pattern that stretched back further than my marriage. She laid it out on her dining room table after we ate. Court documents from 2 states. A harassment complaint filed 4 years ago by a woman in Raleigh. A civil suit settled out of court in Atlanta 18 months after that, a woman who alleged financial coercion and emotional manipulation inside what she had believed was a committed relationship. Same playbook, different cities. He found women who were slightly unhappy in stable lives, moved in carefully, accepted the comfort they offered, and when things ended, usually because he found someone new, he left behind financial and emotional wreckage. My wife hadn't been a co-conspirator. She had been a target. That didn't excuse what she had done. Nothing changed about the betrayal, the stolen money, the 14 months of lies. But it complicated the picture in a way I hadn't expected. Because the man I had spent the last month wanting to hold accountable wasn't just someone who had ruined my marriage, he was someone who had done this before, who had learned it, who was still doing it. I made 2 calls the next morning. The first was to a contact of mine who does private security consulting. I gave him the file. I told him what I needed. By end of day, Derek had been served with a formal legal complaint for his financial entanglement in our marital assets, with an attached cease and desist backed by the documentation Marcus had built. The civil record from Raleigh was included as supporting context. His attorney would understand immediately what kind of exposure he was looking at. He went silent. Completely. No messages, no calls, nothing. That silence was the most honest thing he had communicated since I learned his name. The second call was to my wife's employer, a healthcare network with a strict ethics policy around professional conduct and misuse of company resources. I hadn't planned to make this call, but when Dana pulled the full record, it included itemized expense receipts my wife had filed under a professional development allocation, a weekend conference that, according to the venue's booking records, had never actually taken place. She had used company funds to offset 2 of their trips. I didn't dramatize it. I sent the HR department a single email with the attached receipts and the venue confirmation showing no event had been scheduled. I didn't ask for anything. I let the facts speak. She was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours. Her voicemail to me that night was long. I listened to it once. It moved through blame, then bargaining, then something that was almost grief. At the very end of it, just before the recording cut off, she said, "You didn't have to do all of this." I sat with Caleb that evening while she was leaving that voicemail. We were watching a nature documentary he'd been asking about for weeks. He laughed twice at the penguins. He fell asleep against my arm before it ended. I turned off the television and carried him to his room and stood in his doorway again for a moment, the way I had been doing more often lately. This was it. This was the thing worth protecting. Not the marriage I thought I had. This, the quiet weight of him sleeping, his soccer cleats by the door, his drawings stuck to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like state capitals. The separation moved quickly after that. Dana's firm handled the filings. Asset division, custody arrangements, a support structure built around Caleb's schedule so that nothing in his daily life shifted more than it had to. He would have both of us. Just not in the same house. The last time I sat across from my wife was at a coffee shop 3 weeks before the final paperwork was signed. She had asked to meet. I said yes because I thought Caleb deserved parents who could be in the same room without it costing everyone something. She came in early. No jewelry, no heels. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. She looked like someone who had been living inside the consequences of their own decisions for several months, which she had. We ordered coffee. We sat quietly for a moment. "I'm not going to make excuses," she said. "I know what I did." I nodded. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said. "That's the honest answer. I don't think I was thinking. I think I had just gotten very far inside my own unhappiness and I made a decision that I told myself was only about me, and it wasn't." I didn't interrupt her. "He wasn't." She stopped. Started again. "He wasn't what I thought he was. I see that now. I don't say that to make myself sound like a victim, because I know I'm not. I'm just saying that it also wasn't what I told myself it was." I looked at her for a moment. The woman I had married at 23 who had cried at our rehearsal dinner because she was so happy she didn't know what else to do with it. The woman who had held my hand in the hospital the night Caleb was born and said, I can't believe we made him. She was still in there somewhere, behind all of it. That person was still real, but the life we'd had was over. That was real too. I know you don't owe me anything, she said quietly. I just needed to say it to your face. I waited until she was done. Then I said, I forgive you. I want you to know that. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. But because carrying the weight of it is not something I'm willing to do for the rest of my life, and Caleb needs two parents who aren't at war with each other. She pressed her lips together. Looked down at the table. I also want you to know, I said, that I'm not your enemy. I never was. I was the person who loved you completely and trusted you completely, and you made a choice with that. But going forward, I don't want Caleb to grow up in the middle of our damage. So whenever you're ready to be his mother the way he deserves, I will not stand in the way of that. She nodded once. A tear ran down one side of her face and she didn't wipe it. She reached into her coat pocket and set something on the table between us. A photo strip, the kind from a photo booth. The two of us at a county fair maybe 6 years ago, making ridiculous faces, laughing at ourselves. I had forgotten it existed. I found it when I was packing up the bedroom, she said. I thought you might want it. Or not. But I didn't want to be the only one who had to decide what to do with it. I picked it up. Looked at the two people in it for a moment. Then I folded it once, carefully, and put it in my jacket pocket. Thank you, I said. She nodded. We finished our coffee without saying much else. When we stood up to leave, she hesitated for a moment like she was deciding whether to say something. Then she just said, take care of him. I will, I said. I always have. I walked out into the afternoon and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city moved around me the way cities do, indifferent, continuous, entirely uninterested in the private ends of private lives. I had come into that coffee shop as someone finishing a chapter. I walked out of it as someone who understood what the next one was going to have to be built on. Not bitterness. Not the story of what was done to me. Not revenge, though I understand now why people reach for that word. What I had done wasn't revenge. Revenge is about pain. What I had done was about protecting the things that couldn't protect themselves: my son's stability, my financial future. The truth of what had happened inside a life I had given everything to. I drove home. Caleb was at school for another hour. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet a lot lately, which I was still adjusting to. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I looked at the drawings on the refrigerator: a soccer field, a dog we don't have yet but that he has already named, a self-portrait where he gave himself wings for reasons he has never fully explained. I thought about what my father used to say. That information is the only currency that doesn't lose value. He was right. But there's something he didn't say, which I had to learn on my own. The most valuable thing you can do with the truth is decide, clearly and consciously, what you're going to build with it once you have it. I had built a case. I had built a legal structure. I had built a new routine, a new custody schedule, a new version of Thursday evenings and Saturday mornings. Now I had to build the rest. And sitting there in the quiet of that kitchen, with my son's drawings on the refrigerator and the photo strip folded in my jacket pocket, I realized I wasn't afraid of that. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was just ready for it.